So I want to begin by welcoming you all, because this is about belonging. This whole exploration for this next hour and a half is on the theme of belonging. And I want to begin with my own story around that, which is what's got me to this place today, age 58, and how my own journey, which I'm going to try and give you in a smaller snapshot as possible. I'm going to start with now. So my name is Jules Wingfield, for any of you who come across my work. Who's not been to anything that I've done before? Fabulous. Welcome. So I live in the Forest of Dean, which is between the Severn Estuary and the River Wye. It's the last remaining piece of whole uninterrupted forest left on these islands. And it's a really, really old forest, and it's 200,000 acres. So it goes 7 miles in one direction, 10 miles in the other. And we've got a small community, and we live up a forest track, a clearing in the forest, where I spent the last 30 years of my life doing the kind of work I'm doing here with you today. And when I eventually had enough money, I went to the estate agent with my little suitcase and said, I want to buy a piece of land. And so this piece of land we've had now for 11 years, and it is dedicated really to the whole thing of how do we as humans make this change that we need to make so that we're living in a more integrated way with the web of life, so that we find our right relationship within the web of life. You know, we all know the story of where we've come from as humans, and we find ourselves here today in a profoundly disconnected state from this web of life. And how do we embed ourselves back into that? And that's really the theme of belonging. And I run a whole program of workshops and year-long courses on the land, and all the work is on the land, because for me, if it's not on the land, we're missing a fundamental piece. It's like if we're sitting in a hermetically sealed room, and there's nothing in that room that touches this web of life, that plugs us back into this web of life. We can't go all the way home. We just can't, because we are this web of life. We are this nature. We are fundamentally woven into the fabric of it. And the fuck up, as I see it, is we've gradually, over thousands of years, removed ourselves further and further and further away from our nature in pursuit of evolution, in pursuit of our greatness. And somewhere along the way, we started to realize that it doesn't work, that doesn't work, and that we need to come back to find our right relationship. And what I'm offering you today is a tiny taste of a year-long course that I run called Circles of Belonging. And the point that it's a year long is because we need to create a circle of people where we can do that deep work to come home to ourselves and embed ourselves back into humanity in a healthy way, but wider than that, the wider circle of this web of life. And in my experience of running workshops and courses and being a part of this movement for 30 years, what I've seen is one-off events don't necessarily integrate us fully and make it possible for us to really embed that into our lives. They're great experiences that kind of give us this massive kind of, wow, that was amazing, something really incredible happened. And then we go back into our life, and within a few weeks or a few months, we've sort of fallen into our old patterns again. So doing this journey over 4 seasons where we can get connected to a particular piece of land, and we're not there all the time, you come for a series of chunks of time, like a few days at a time over the year, so we can be there over this time, and with that same circle of people where it's like, so I'll journey back. So when I was 15, I left home, whatever home was, which wasn't really home for me, but I left the environment that I was brought up in. And I kind of went to Stonehenge. I went to Stonehenge Free Festival. I was like, I need to find my people. Had a sense that these might be my people, and started on that quest to find out who I was. And And I knew I wanted to live a life that was more connected to the land, on the land. I mean, as a child, I was always running off into the bushes and into the forests and all of that kind of stuff. So I knew there was something in this. And I joined the Traveller movement, these land-based, nature-based, loving human beings who wanted nothing more than to just live in peace on the land, travel, work at the festivals and so on, and honour these sacred sites that we have on these lands. These lands are so ancient and beautiful. And I went to Stonehenge, and for those of you who are old enough in here, you might remember the Battle of the Beanfields. So I was, a part of that, and that day, Margaret Thatcher was ruling at the time, ruling our lands, and it was her mission really to eradicate the travellers, to eradicate anybody who was living in a connected way, who was living in any way that was honouring the context of the wider web of life. And I vowed that day, like I was on my knees, just covered in battle wounds and everything, that I would find a piece of land and I would create a space where people could come so that they felt like they belonged. Because I felt exiled. I know in my life, it's like as soon as I stepped out into my life, I felt completely out of sync with what was happening in the world and with mainstream culture and what I was being advised to do and how I was being advised to live my life and how school was, all of that. And the question sat with me is, where do I belong? Where are my people? Who are my people? And where is the land that resonates with my body, that I feel I can rest to, that I feel inspired by, that I feel loved by, that I feel held by? And that was really the journey I went on. And then in my early 20s, I came upon someone called Sobonfu Som, which anyone knows Sobonfu Som's teachings? So she's a Black First Nations woman who comes from Burkina Faso in Africa. And she comes from some people called the Dagara people. And the teachings in the Dagara and the way they live just completely blew me wide open. It was like that's what I want, something towards that. And I give you a few examples of how they live, which is what touches into this piece around belonging. So imagine if, when you were born onto a piece of land that 7 or 8 generations behind you, or probably more, had also been born on that same piece of land, that they knew this land. They belonged to this land. They knew where all their ancestors were buried. They knew where everyone had been born. And that when you were born, there were 40, 50, 60 pairs of eyes witnessing your birth, and 40, 50, 60 pairs of hands welcoming you into this world, into this village, where there wasn't a question. You didn't have to earn your belonging. You simply did belong, and you knew you did. It's like our soul knows that. There's this, it's like from our first breath, I think we feel the grief, we feel the loss, we feel that, this isn't how it's supposed to be. I'm not meant to be born under these bright lights in a sterile environment with people handling me really roughly and then whipping me off somewhere to be washed and brought back, hermetically sealed. I mean, it's just like, like what we have lost. And if we had arrived that way, and that we are there in this village and we have our mother, our primary carer, but in this village, any lactating mother was available to breastfeed any baby, any child. If the child didn't know where its mother was, it would just go up to another woman and be fed. And the role of the village was to find the brilliance of this person, to find the essence of this being, of what their gift was and who their character was, and to just elevate them and encourage them to come and be the best that they can be. Whereas what we have in our modern world, as we're brought up, even with the best well-meaning parents, this isn't about slagging off our parents and bashing pillows. It's like, even with the best well-meaning, there's so many generations of a teaching around how our original circle was formed, and that's conditions of love and conditions of worth. What do I have to do in order to stay inside this first circle, which I need for my basic survival, for food, shelter, water and love, this primary circle of my primary caregivers? And we sense and read and constantly learn, like, what do I need to do, what do I need to be, and what mustn't I do and what mustn't I be in order to stay inside this primary circle of love. Because if I'm flung out of it, I'm gonna die. I mean, that's how it feels to us as small, vulnerable beings, because humans, when they're babies, are probably one of the most vulnerable species. We're so dependent. So we learn very quickly, and so we learn conditions of love and conditions of worth. And that's how the shame wound gets formed. So we develop this wound of core shame that somehow or another, we're not okay just as we are. We have to be like this and be like that and not be like this and not be like that in order to belong. And I would venture that our deepest need as humans, there's two. One is to love and be loved, and the other is to belong. And we will do pretty much anything to belong. Because to be outside and exiled and on our own is the most painful thing for us, whether that's disconnected outside of this beautiful web of life or outside a circle of humans that we feel safe and comfortable and welcomed in. That is such a deep need, and we've only got to look back at our lives to see the choices that we make in order to belong. And we'll throw other really important needs under the bus in order to meet this one, because it's so important. So in this village, there was no question about, you wouldn't be sitting in here going, well, I wonder if, I'm liked. I wonder if I'm allowed to be, is it okay for me to be in here? I wonder if, is it all right? Or they're much cooler than me, or they're a bit, all of that stuff that goes on when we're constantly assessing and questioning whether we're welcomed, whether we're fundamentally welcome here. And one of the most beautiful traditions, which is the one that touched me the most, that sent me on this quest of belonging, is the Dagara people. Their spiritual teachings were such that they saw it, that if you did something wrong, what we would call a crime or some misdemeanor, like, you punched someone or you stole something or you were sort of verbally abusive to say, you did something wrong, what we would consider wrong and bad. How they saw that is that if somebody does something like that, it's because they have forgotten about their belonging, that they've lost touch with the fact that they belong, and that they've lost touch with the fact that they're embedded within this. They've basically become disconnected from love, however they're held in that field of love. So their answer to that wasn't to take them outside of the village and go and lock them up somewhere for 20 years or 10 years and shame them even some more and ask them to take responsibility for their actions because they've been a terrible person. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, it's important stuff. But what they would do in order to help that person is they would bring them into the middle of the village. They would gather everybody in the village around that person, and they would spend as long as it took telling that person, reminding that person of all their amazing things that they are and who they are at a soul level and how much they're loved and how brilliant they are and how important they are and how much their gifts are valued and that who they are at a core level is beautiful. And they would do that until it got through, and they would kind of break. They'd just be like, oh God, because they'd be probably feeling a bit shit or a bit defensive, and they would just keep going until that person broke. And then they're back in, and there's no need for punishment. And something in that really spoke to me, because I looked at my schooling and I looked at how society was, and I thought, I want a different way. And I've spent, I've done a lot of things in my life. I spent many years being a traveller and really on that quest to find the belonging, and where I've arrived at, and loads of therapy, every possible personal development you can imagine, every quest in another country, etc., etc. And I suppose in a way, the work I offer now, it's like it used to be really quite complex, and now it just feels incredibly simple. And it's this piece around being welcomed exactly as we are. Exactly as we are. And I believe that we ache and long for this. We deeply want to be accepted just as we are, like truly accepted. However I show up in any moment, whether I'm like, well, I don't want to be here, I'm fucking pissed off and moody, to I'm in a complete vulnerable wreck of a mess, or I'm feeling ecstatic and quite loud actually, or, you know, whatever it is, however we're feeling, however we are, that there's a space and a place for us. That doesn't mean that we have to trample on other people, but it also doesn't mean that we have to apologize at some fundamental level for being who we are. How do we create a space where that's possible? And I believe it's possible. Absolutely believe it's possible. And this piece around welcome is powerful because this word welcome sits in our psyche as a kind of, it's like, I think from that moment, coming back to that first breath where we didn't feel that welcoming and our soul knew it was meant to be like that, there's grief. There's grief already. The separation began right there as we went on that quest. And I think that we want to be really seen and loved and welcomed at a core level. And any moment that actually happens, how do we respond? We say, oh my God, oh no, it's so uncomfortable, oh my God. It's so excruciating and exposing, you know, if someone does actually really see us, because we're worried that they're going to see the shameful bit. And it's like, well, if they see that, they're definitely going to fling me out of the circle. You know, but actually, that isn't necessarily what happens. It isn't what happens. So we long to be seen, and at the same time, we do a lot to try to escape being seen because we're faced with ourselves, and that's potentially terrifying because we don't want to be alone. You know, sometimes we go and be alone as a way to sort of regroup and sort of like, oh, safer on my own. But that's not really the same as actively wanting to be your own because, you know, you're in a blissful open state. It's like, can we be alone once we feel like we've been really, truly welcomed? And we often reach for relationship and intimacy for this reason, that we want to be really fully welcomed and seen. But then it doesn't happen. And we're like, oh, but you're not, you know, all kind of rough. Anyway, that's another workshop for another day.